So this meeting will be recorded, and the slides will also be shared out to all attendees via email and posted on our website. So just for those, since the recording just started, this is the Community Wealth Building Planning and Pre-Development Grant Pre-Submittal Conference. So quick introductions. My name is Nneka Onwuzurike. I use she and they pronouns, and I work in the Mayor's Office of Equity and Racial Justice. For the last 2.5 years or so, I've been leading our Community Wealth Building Initiative in partnership with a number of our departments. And so this pilot program is done in partnership with the Department of Planning and Development. And so I will pass it off to Maiwa to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Thanks again for joining us. My name is Maiwa Fanu. I am a project manager and I work with the Department of Planning and Development. And the Community Wealth Building is one of the Chicago Recovery Plan's grant program I am managing.
Apply for funding for.
Thanks. So the agenda for today, we're going to do a quick overview of community wealth building as a whole. At this point, you all have probably seen these slides and this description a number of times. So just want to ground folks in our overall community wealth building initiative. Then we'll spend the bulk of the time doing an overview of this specific grant, what it entails, what our priorities are, who is eligible, et cetera. Then we'll walk through at a pretty high level what the application process will look like. So we'll screen share. So for those of you who haven't started the submittable process, we'll just quickly screen share and walk you through what it looks like. It should be fairly user-friendly, and then happy to answer any questions related to the content of the grant, as well as any logistical questions that you have about how to access and apply. So community wealth building, our definition of that is an approach to economic development that promotes the local, democratic, and shared ownership and control of community assets. And this definition is the official City of Chicago definition of community wealth building that was created in partnership with a number of our community partners. And those words were selected very intentionally. And so we go on to further define what we mean when we say local, democratic, and shared ownership and control. And I always like to emphasize that it's an and, not an or. And so as you all will emphasize a little bit more throughout this meeting, but also you'll see in the application where we ask you to explain how your project aligns with our definition of local, democratic, and shared ownership and control. So what we mean by local is that the development or the project is in the hands of the residents in which the neighborhood in which the development is being built, not in the hands of residents that live in another Chicago neighborhood or in another city entirely. So local really means hyper local. How are the folks that live in that community on that block actually owning and participating in the ownership and control of that asset? By democratic, we mean how are all of those folks also participating in decision making? So what is the governance model that acknowledges the various, kind of traditional power dynamics that exist and facilitates an equitable decision making process, right? Where a lot of traditional asset ownership models often have a hierarchy where it prioritizes some folks' voices over others, it excludes those other voices. We're really looking at models that are trying to break down that power dynamic and really share decision-making power. And then lastly, shared. So in the hands of as many people as possible, we're not looking at models where the ownership and control is concentrated in the hands of just one person or even a privileged few people, even if those few people are people of color. We're really looking at models that are thinking about broad-based ownership and control. And we can share more about this too you'll see more of this on our website, but we won't spend much more time on that today. So at a high level, when it comes to community wealth building, we are really looking at models that are majority owned and controlled by residents. And so if you think about the kind of two main kind of points around community wealth building, who owns the asset and who controls it. We're looking at asset models where 51% of it is owned and controlled by community. So in this top right quadrant where there's high community ownership and high community control. And so we know that, there's a lot of difficulties in being able to create a model, and a lot of challenges and a lot of benefits too, to getting a model to be in this top right quadrant, but that is why we're providing these resources, both with technical assistance and pre-development capital, to support folks who have a vision of moving their projects further and further into this top right quadrant. So the city, we know that community wealth building can look like a lot of different things, and there's a lot of different models out there and hybrid models, et cetera. So for us as a city, we've decided to first start off this initiative by selecting 4 priority models. And we picked one priority model in each of our 4 pillars. So business ownership, home ownership, land stewardship, and commercial property. And within each of those 4, we've selected a priority model. So you'll see within business ownership, we're really prioritizing worker cooperatives, businesses that are owned and controlled by their employees. Home ownership, we're prioritizing limited equity housing cooperatives, land stewardship, community land trust, and within commercial property, community investment vehicles. So we'll share these slides, and there's also more on our website, but I want to make sure that folks know that this is our priority when it comes to this grant opportunity. Community wealth building, of course, but even within community wealth building, these 4 specific models, and you can kind of read those definitions there. And happy to answer more questions about that as we move forward. So the city is investing $15 million from the Chicago Recovery Plan, so using federal dollars from the American Rescue Plan Act to advance our community wealth building vision. So part of this $15 million, we're trying to accomplish 3 goals with that $15 million investment. 1, we want to strengthen the ecosystem. 2, we want to build a pipeline of projects. And then 3, we want to invest in some large scale pilot projects. So with those 3 goals, we have 3 different phases of the work, and we've kind of bucketed that $15 million along those 3 goals. So when it comes to the ecosystem, this phase has launched already. So last year we released an RFP for technical assistance providers in 6 key areas to apply and submit a proposal for how they would offer community wealth building specific TA resources for free to community members in these 6 areas. We, about a couple of weeks ago, announced the 17 grantees of that. You can see the list of that on our website, who will be creating their own programs, as well as providing some TA support for the grantees of this program. So that phase is kind of closed, right? So we've begun work on that ecosystem, and it was about a $5 million investment of the total 15. And then the phase that we're currently in, and the goal and purpose of this conversation, is thinking about pipeline development. So we know we want to build out the pipeline of projects, that there's a lot of projects that are kind of in that idea and planning phase. How do we give them some dollars to support and move them further and further down the pipeline to development stage? So we are investing $3 million approximately in this current stage, offering up to $150,000 in planning and pre-development grants. And those grantees will also have access to technical assistance from the folks from phase 1, right? So from some of the grantees that we're working with in the ecosystem development space, as well as obviously you'll have your own capital to work with your own consultants and, specialized consultants at your will. So that's phase 2. And then just for you all to know and for your awareness, we're planning to launch phase 3, the 3rd and final phase of kind of these large scale development grants in Q4 of this year. So by the end of this calendar year, we will have released all the RFPs related to this $15 million community wealth building project. So I want to clarify something, because we've gotten some questions to try and understand the difference between phase 1 and phase 2. And so I wanted to just add this additional slide just to further clarify who the differences in terms of who the grantees and the applicants would be. With phase 1, that's closed, that was all about the ecosystem building. The types of folks that applied and got grants were what we called ecosystem players. So various intermediaries that were doing, the 6 different types of services that we outlined on this page, right? Research and advocacy, education and outreach, legal and governance, so on and so forth. So the type of organizations that applied and got funding were research institutions, legal clinics, financial institutions, business incubators, business consultants, et cetera. For phase 2, which is what we're talking about now, so building the pipeline by offering planning and pre-development grants, the folks that we anticipate applying and that this is intended for is for the projects themselves, the worker cooperatives themselves, the limited equity housing co-ops themselves, the land trusts, community investment vehicles, et cetera. So we're not looking for applications from those intermediaries, but from the actual projects who are looking for funding for their project. So hopefully, as I get into the next few slides and get into some of your questions, we can make sure that you have a clear understanding around the difference between those two. And so some of you who maybe applied for this first wave and didn't get it might be starting to see that some of the projects that you were putting forth might be more applicable to the current phase that we're in around planning and pre-development. So a quick overview of the purpose of this. So the goal of this program, so the Community Wealth Building Planning and Pre-Development Grants, is essentially to build the pipeline of shovel-ready, investment-ready community wealth building projects that meet community priorities. So we know that there's a lot of projects out there, and I don't think this is just unique and specific to community wealth building. I think it's broader around community development as a whole, that often have strong missions and visions, but they can lack a clear project scope, project manager, don't have their bylaws in place, haven't begun the design and engineering process, don't have clear cost estimates, various things that are, we're kind of bucketing under the planning and pre-development costs, right? And so we know that there is a gap in terms of capital that can be provided to these projects. I think specifically around community wealth building project, that there's not that many funders who are able to offering funding at this stage. And so our goal is to kind of meet that gap by providing this planning and pre-development grant, and knowing that these needs are kind of most acute in the South and West Side communities in Chicago. So as has been mentioned, this program is a part of the Chicago Recovery Plan. And so a lot of this is also looking at the communities who are most disproportionately impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. So just some quick facts about the program. So we're offering up to $150,000 grant. And the minimum that will be awarded is $50,000. So you can request between $50,000 and $150,000. You'll also get access to some technical assistance support from our community wealth ecosystem building grantees that I mentioned already. And it's not listed here, but the expectation is that you spend that money within 1 year. So within 12 months, let's say you apply for $150,000, that in your application, you're making a 12-month project plan and allocating how that $150,000 would be spent over those 12 months and where you'll end up at the end of that phase, right? So ideally, you're furthering your project along and potentially in a position to apply for other development grants that DPD is offering by the end of that 1 year. So we are anticipating making about 20 grants. So having 20 grantees, the number could be more, it could be less, but I think in that range of 20, maybe 20 to 30 different grants. We don't have a funding allocation. I think this has been a question that a lot of folks have asked is, do you kind of have quotas for how many of those 20 are going to be worker co-op projects or land trust projects or what have you? We don't have any of those quotas, but we, as always, are going to aim for an equal distribution of projects across the city, with our focus being on the South and West Side and also across the models. So we're going to see what we get, what people apply for, and then kind of make decisions there, but know that we won't make it all 20 of them are worker cooperatives or all 20 of them are community investment vehicles. We're going to look to have an equitable distribution across those four. The deadline is in 6 weeks. So Wednesday, March 15th at 11:59 p.m. midnight. Note, we had a slight change yesterday. The deadline used to be noon. So you now have an extra 12 hours as a gift to you. It's now due at midnight, but note that we will not accept late submissions. Note that there are a number of folks who tried to submit, and I think for all of our programs that tried to submit at the last minute and don't make it, and there's nothing, absolutely nothing that we can do about it. And so as a result, we often try to encourage you to submit it at a full day in advance, because if you run into technical issues or you didn't realize you needed to attach this document and now it's not letting you submit, there's nothing that we're going to be able to do, and there's no one going to be able to respond to your email at 11:58 p.m. when you have questions. So we encourage you to try and submit it at least a day in advance. So project priorities, the way the application is written, and we'll get into that, it makes very clear that these are our 4 model priorities, right? Our 4 worker cooperatives, limited equity housing co-ops, community land trust and community investment vehicles. And also it leaves the door a little bit open for others who have projects that they believe fit the community wealth building definition, that are not one of these 4. So I want to make that clear that it is technically eligible for you to submit a project that you believe is a community wealth building project, and you make the case for how it aligns with our definition, our values, and our goals. That isn't one of these 4. But as we come to funding decisions, we will be prioritizing models that incorporate these 4. So just to kind of differentiate what is eligible versus what will be prioritized in making our decisions. And then also when it comes to the project type, I want to make clear too that we're going to be funding both real estate and non-real estate projects. So there'll be commercial real estate projects. So an example of that could be, like a community investment vehicle or a worker cooperative with an actual brick and mortar site. We're also going to be funding residential projects. So various limited equity housing co-ops. I imagine most community land trusts will be thinking about residential projects. And then also non-real estate projects. So I know that there's a number of worker cooperatives who don't have a brick and mortar need, who don't have plans for it now or anytime in the near future, and that's okay. And we know that you as a business still have kind of these pre-launch capital needs. And so in the application, you'll see that there's an opportunity for you to state that your project won't be looking at real estate. And I want to make sure that that's clear, that you are still eligible to apply for this, although there are lots of questions in there that relate to having a site identified, et cetera. Okay, there's a lot of words on this page, but I think it's really important for folks to take this in, and it'll be on our website and in the application. But this is a planning and pre-development grant, and we tried to do some work to make clear to folks what does that look like to be in the planning and pre-development stage. And so this is a little bit of a, I think, rough guide, a directional guide on like the types of projects that are right for this grant. So we have kind of 5 different stages that we've articulated: ideation, planning, early stage pre-development, late stage pre-development, and then development stage. And so projects that are in the ideation phase are projects that kind of have like a big picture concept or idea, but they still have a lot of planning and preparation ahead. They probably don't have like a clear vision and mission statement. They probably haven't solidified a lead organization or a project team. They haven't really done much research or conducted any really much forms of community engagement. I often like to think about this as like, you woke up with an idea a month ago or so, and you've always been thinking about enacting this, creating this vision of this idea, but you haven't put any of the kind of skeleton in place around a team or a plan yet. So that is a little bit too early of a project to fit the need to fit this grant, right? And so we'll put some resources on our website of other TA providers, like I think our neighborhood business development centers, probably even some of our community wealth building ecosystem grantees who will be creating programs that I think can help you move your project from this kind of big picture, a little amorphous idea into something that has a little bit more of a structure to it. Then there's folks who are in the planning stage who often have a mission and vision statement. They have a lead organization firmly in place, and they've started to begin recruiting a project team. Like maybe it's not fully in place, but they've started to recruit people to be on the project team or be on an advisory council. Maybe they've begun a business plan, begun to conduct feasibility studies, but still have a lot more to do to kind of solidify what your business model is, what that framework is, need to conduct more community engagement. So that is a planning stage, which I think is a really good fit for this program. Then you go to the next level of early stage pre-development, where at this point, you've got a solidified planning team and advisory council. You've likely completed a business plan and some community engagement. But what you have yet to do, and potentially even identified a site, But what you haven't yet to do is kind of really refine what your presentation pitch is to funders. You've maybe identified a site, but you don't have site control yet. So a lot of your pre-development work might be in how do you gain do additional research to figure out which of the sites that you want, and also actually gain control of those sites and get the capital that you need to get control of those sites. Then there's late stage pre-development, where often you've got full site control, have conducted some environmental assessments, but you're still trying to get full financing, finalize some of your drawings before you can be shovel ready. And then the last stage is our development stage. So where we often kind of use this phrase of projects that are shovel ready, meaning that you're like ready to go. You've got your completed final planning, design, engineering, you've got full site control, you've received the sufficient funding. And so where that green box is kind of like what our target area is. But we feel like ideation is a little too early, and you probably need some TA support to kind of refine the project a little bit to move it further down. The development stage is a little too late, and we'll talk a little bit later on like other resources. There's a lot of grants out right now for you to apply to. So yeah, I want to also state that this is directional, and so you might not fit perfectly in one of these boxes, but hopefully this gives you a good idea of what stage of project we're looking for. I think at this point I'll pass it to Maiwa to kind of go through the next phase of this.
Thank you, Nneka. I just want to say at first that because we are in an open office setting, you might hear people talking, and I'll try as much as possible to amplify my voice loud enough. Okay, so what are the eligible expenses? So for the planning and pre-development phase, the eligible expenses are the personnel. So the project managers, owners rep, community organizers, professional technical services, architectural and engineering design. That's for those that have like structural project or like brick and mortar projects. Environmental expenses, community engagement and outreach. I think this will be expenses that will fit for those who don't have brick and mortar structures or that they're applying for. So also market and feasibility studies, NS money on property, closing costs, licensing fees. So if you need to get your business licenses, if you need to get building permits, so these are eligible costs or expenses that this particular grant would cover. Also materials and supplies, equipment less than $5,000, travel, and also administration fees. For instance, physical sponsors, that's for if you're applying to a physical sponsor or lead organization. Next slide. So eligibility for applicants. So who is eligible to apply for these grants? Non-profit organizations, for-profit organization, as well as cooperative. For instance, like the Limited Workers Cooperative Association. Geographical eligibility. So this grant is open citywide, but we are focusing on prioritizing low-income neighborhoods and communities within Chicago, communities with the qualified census tracts. To see a list of qualified census tracts, you can see that on our website. Okay, so what is the application process? For some of you who apply through for the first phase, the ecosystem phase, you notice that you apply through iSupplier. However, for this phase, for the planning and pre-development phase, application is through Submittable. In order to apply through Submittable, you have to sign up. All applications must be sent, all applications must be made on Submittable, and applications by email would not be accepted, and you have to set up an account. This is a link that would also be available. That's also available on our website that you can click to sign up for Submittable. Application questions. So these are the questions that will be contained in the application on Submittable. So the question, and each of these questions have sub questions, but the lead questions are this: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 of these sessions are going to be the application questions. So lead organization, who's going to be the lead organization, the name of the lead organization for the project. So if you're applying through a physical sponsor, the physical sponsor's organization name, project description, you'll be asked to describe your project and what phase you are in your project. Team members and community engagement. So who are your team members? The names of your team members, the role or title of your team members, legal and governance. What is the structure of your organization? How is your organization structured? Financing. So how much are you applying for the grant? And how much have you already secured? Although having any amount of money secured does not affect any decision that's going to be made on your application. We're just asking those questions just to have an idea of how your project is coming up and at what stage you are at your project. So you don't have to have like any money saved up for the app for the project already. We just want to have an idea of what, like I said, have an idea of what stage you are at the project. So real estate and construction. So this would apply mostly to those that have a brick and mortar project. So this would ask you questions like, do you have a physical address? Where is physical address? Is your project a vacant lot or a vacant property? The project management session would ask you, when do you envisage that the project will be ready for public occupancy or for public use? What stage you're at the project, and the demographic question. Although it's optional, but we encourage you to do answer the questions, asking questions about your race, what area you are, maybe, and like these questions help us with our metrics. And we do, like I said earlier on, we do encourage you to please answer the questions, although they're optional.
So I'm going to quickly scan through what the application looks like. I imagine most of you on this call hopefully have created your Submittable account, so you've seen this, but I just want to walk through just so you all get a look, can see the look and feel of the application. For those of you who've used iSupplier before, I think you'll be happy to know that we're using Submittable, which is much more, I think, user-friendly. So when you get in, create your account, it should look something like this. So you'll see the brief description, a lot of what we've talked about already. And then to Maya's point, there's a number of different sections. So she just kind of read off what all the key sections are. The lead organization, you'll see it's like a lot of contact information, asking about the legal entity, the project description, so the project name. This is the piece that we walked through earlier about what stage is your project in with those explanations. And then we ask for a short description of the project. I want to just note here that, we're looking for 2 to 3 sentences, and the goal of this is for us to have a readily available description of your project to use on our website, to use with press, etc. So just kind of keep that in mind as you write this, and also apologize for the background noise here. Asking about the project's mission, vision, and values. For a lot of the questions, you'll see that we have definitions of what we mean. So just be sure as you're reading this that you're reading through what's in this kind of description box to get an understanding of what we're looking for, both in terms of content and in length, right? What we mean by mission statement, how long we are expecting it to be, what we mean by values, what we're expecting. Describe the impact that this project will have in community. I want to emphasize the importance of this question. So make sure you're taking a look at all the sub questions that we have underneath here. But this is going to be a big factor for us as we're looking at project is what is the impact that it's going to have in the community? What's your vision for how it will impact your community? What are the ways in which folks that you've engaged already are excited about the impact that this will have in your community? So knowing that this will be a really big differentiating factor as we look at a number of projects. We ask you to name your model type. So ideally it's one of these four. If not, there would be an opportunity for you to select other. And then kind of understanding where you are in what phase of the project that you're in. So what kind of, is there real estate involved? If not, that's fine. But if so, let us know. Do you have a business plan or strategic plan? You know, to Mayo's point, you'll see that for a number of these questions, it will note like it is not required for you to have this, but if you have it, we would like to see it, right? So you can easily select no, but if you select yes, we'll ask you to upload it. And so a lot of these questions are for us to get a good understanding of you know, the applications that we're looking at. How many of them fall in the planning stage? How many of them do we think fall in the early stage pre-development? And how many of them fall in the late stage pre-development? So a lot of these questions are really like trying to identify what stage that you're in. So we really encourage you to be honest about that. You know, you don't need a project manager, but if you have one, you should state that you have one, right? Like, you know, things like that. So third section is team members and community engagement. So we're really looking for projects to have a lead organization in place and for you to describe that organization's capacity, willingness, and track record of success. Again, another important question to make sure that you read what we mean when we say these things and respond accordingly. We want to know if you have a project manager, how much of your team is assembled. So again, trying to figure out how far along are you in the process, and then who's on your team. You know, what organizations do they represent, but also what role do they play as a part of this project, right? So making sure that you're answering kind of both of those, so we get a sense of the types of folks who are on your like core team or your advisory team, et cetera. And then, you know, have you secured any community support? So again, this goes to that community impacts question and also support. We want to know what folks are saying, who you've engaged, to what level, and then if there's, again, optional, but you can upload letters of support. So note that they're not required, but it may strengthen your application. So the legal and governance section. So we have two questions here that are fairly open-ended and want to make sure folks know what we're looking for. So they're structured the same, but one is about ownership, one is about governance. So describe the current and or intended ownership structure, and then tell us how it aligns with our definition of local, democratic, and shared, not or. So you should describe your current ownership structure. And I think for some projects, it might be the case that how it is currently structured might not be what the end state is meant to be. So making sure that you're articulating if there's a difference, what that difference is going to be. And then, not to continue to say this over and over again, but we're looking for the local, democratic, and shared. I know there's a number of folks who have started to explain to us how their projects are locally owned, but they don't actually have they're not touching on the democratic and shared piece. So then similarly for governance structure, what is both current and intended governance structure and how it aligns with our definition. So I'll just, in the interest of time, kind of skim through this last piece or these last few pieces. How much money are you requesting? And then what is the total project cost as a whole? And then if you were to get the grant, how would you spend the next 12 months? So this is the opportunity. And this is, again, another key question. What do you need the money for? And how are you going to use it? So let's say you're asking for 150, how much of that is going to go to personnel? Describe that. When do you think that's going to begin? How much of that is going to go to your closing costs? How much is that? When would it begin? So this is your kind of one opportunity to name what your need is as it relates to your planning and pre-development costs. Have you received financing for the project already? And then real estate and construction. So if you have a site identified or if you have multiple sites, there will be an opportunity for you to name where those sites are and the status of those sites and the status of your site control, right? If you're just researching sites versus you actually have you own the property and can provide a deed, etc. And so uploading documentation to kind of just verify the option you've selected. Again, some other questions just to get a better understanding of where you are. Like, do you have construction cost estimates? How far along are you with your drawings? Again, just trying to understand where you fall. And then project management, I think this is the last one. So when did this project begin? When do you end it complete? When do you estimate that it will be completed? We want to know who you're working with. So what TA providers, what do you have architects on board already? Are you working with legal clinics, business incubators, consultants? Just give us the names or organizations of the folks that you're working with to support this project. And then also some of this work will be refined after we've selected the 20 or so grantees, but we want to know what other support that you need so we as a city can help you get access to that. So beyond financial capital, we're just curious, what other things are you finding that you're in need of? Do you need access to land? Do you need someone to come in and do some training for your members? Is there specific policies that need to be on our radar to change, et cetera? And then Maiwa mentioned this, but lastly, this is an optional demographic question that would be helpful for us if you would like to share that. So we'll wrap up here with I'll pass back to Maiwa just to kind of quickly wrap up the last few slides.
Thank you, Nika. So like you know, or you don't know, the application, the planning and pre-development grant phase launched January 18th, and we are having our pre-submittal conference right now. The application deadline is March 15th, 11:59 p.m. Central Time. That's before midnight. Please, like Nika emphasized, and try to apply at least a day before the deadline. So if you run into any technical issues, we're able to help you. And like you said, nobody's going to be working at 10 p.m. or 11 p.m. Announcements, we anticipate the announcements of awardees or winners of grantees announcements will be made in May or early June. So this slide is for additional sources. So if you need assistance with your application, these are other resources that you can go through: Neighborhood Business Development Center, nonprofits capacity building application assistance work. There are other sources that you could use if you need assistance with your application. Other grant opportunities, these are other funding opportunities that you can take advantage of. The community development grant of if your project is less than $250,000. Community development grant, also, this is the big one. If your project is from $250,000 to $5 million, you have equitable transit-oriented development grants, and finally, climate infrastructure grants. I just want to make a quick note that double dipping into these grants is prohibited. So that means like you can't stack grants. You can't stack grants amount on grant amount. So if you're going to apply for any of these programs or all of the programs, make sure that your scope of work is significantly different from each application. So this is the contact information. If you need to reach out to us or you have any questions or inquiries at all, you can send us an email at cwb@cityofchicago.org, or you can go to our website. You can also utilize the messages icon in the submittable application. So we encourage you to please sign up for submittable as soon as you can, just in case you have any questions, and we hope we'll be able to answer all your questions and inquiries.
Okay, so now we'll answer questions. There are a few that we've answered in the chat that I think are worth just stating out loud. So someone asked essentially, is this a rolling app, in that like, will you be reviewing as applications come in or all at once? So the answer is all at once. So after the deadline on 3/15. We'll then, we're kind of in the process of assembling an evaluation committee, and we'll have a process where all of them get reviewed at one time. There's a lot of questions about like how the funding is going to be released. And we're still trying to figure out what can be possible with this, but it will be similar to other, it will be a reimbursement of sorts. We're still trying to figure out what that can be, but it won't be all up front. It will likely be in different waves. And so we'll clarify that in the next couple of days. And then we'll post that as a follow-up to this info session and share it with you all.
Yeah, I think what we can do.
Oops.
To make the decision.
So can grant funding be used for equity or startup funding?
Yeah.
So I'm going to just go back to the eligibility of the grant expenses. So I think the closest that feels like that gets to is you can use the funding for personnel to offer member owner stipends. And so I think that's maybe as close as we get to actual equity investments in the business. So that's probably worth, maybe we can actually have a follow-up if on that question, if you have more thoughts. There's a question around how the application will be scored. So we can update our website too to include some of the big categories that we're looking at. And so I'm realizing that we haven't listed that, but it'll essentially be about 3 or 4 different categories that align with each of our questions. So, I emphasize a lot on community impact. So that will be a huge weight in the scoring, as well as some other things around feasibility, which are kind of related to the questions around like the lead organization, your explanation of how of what the project actually is and its impact and how that relates to the timeline. So like, various questions like that. So we'll put that on our website of the kind of key scoring criteria that we'll be looking at, but you'll note that it'll align pretty closely to the questions that we're asking.
Nika, I would like to clarify on a comment I made during my presentation. I saw someone ask a question that said, did you say you can or cannot stack grants? To clarify again, I said you can't stack grants if it's on the same scope. So if you're applying that, I need for instance, that you're applying to community development grant that you need to renovate a restaurant, you can't submit that same scope to community wealth building that you need to renovate a restaurant. So it has to be a different scope. It can be from different sources, but like the scope has to be different. It can't be the same. So I hope that clarifies.
Yeah. So just to also add on to that, essentially what we're saying is if you have a project and you have a big funding gap, you can apply for this. You can, if it's also an equitable transit-oriented development project, you should look at those funds. If it's also climate, you should look at that. You should essentially be going after all the funds that you and or your project are eligible for. One thing that we're not going to allow though is asking for money from 2 different sources to pay for the same thing. So if you submit to our grant and you say you need a project manager and you need 80 grand to do that, and then you go to apply for an ETOD, Equitable Transit Oriented Development Grant, and you say you need 80 grand for a project manager. And if you get those 2 things, you're not going to get both 80 grand for both buckets of money to fund the one thing, right? If that makes sense. But you can apply for multiple grants. So that's what we say. Don't double stack the line item, I guess. But you can have that project getting funding from DPD, from DKs, from BACP, right? You should really be thinking about Chicago Recovery Plan in that way, actually. So hopefully that clarifies. If not, feel free to ask another question about it. There's a bunch of questions on like eligible organizations. I'm trying to go back to that slide. So these are the folks. So folks are asking about fiscal sponsors and things like that. So you need an entity, a legal entity to apply to receive the funds, right? And so we won't be giving any funds to individuals. I guess it's maybe like a big clarifying thing. So it needs to be an like a nonprofit or for-profit entity that is applying for this, not an individual person with their with their individual bank account. Yeah, so there's a few other questions around who can apply, but I think essentially that this is kind of what it boils down to. If that didn't answer it and you have specific questions, feel free to email us or set up time. There's questions around renovation. Yes. So I think on that application, there is a section around what type of project this is. Let's see if I'm gonna find it. But you can, the project can be no real estate, first of all, real estate with no construction, a rehab of an existing structure, construction of a new construction, so constructing a new structure or an addition of an existing building, or both, right? So there's a variety of things that can be done and you can use, your project can incorporate. How should technical assistance support from phase one be included in proposed budget use of these funds? I think I would say two things. One is you're thinking about what you want to use the funding for. I think you should be specific about what your needs are, because I think that you might have needs that our existing TA providers won't have capacity to support you on, right? So for example, one of our TA providers is a legal clinic who will be able to offer legal support, but also has a capacity for the number of projects that they can support each year. So there is a world in which they're able to provide you all of the support that you need within their capacity, or you might need to budget to have additional supports provided. So I would say just do your best guess around how much do you feel like you would need to actually hire a specialized person to work with you on your project versus maybe stating here towards the bottom when we ask what other needs do you have. I think this is another opportunity to state that. So we're going to do our best to match make, but I think I would state what you need here, knowing that this thing can always shift once we get into the contracting phase. If we determine, oh, you allocated 15 grand to get like some, I don't know, financial modeling done. Well, we actually have a TA provider who could do that. Would this person be a good fit for you? If so, maybe you can reallocate that 15K to something else. So all that to say, put in this budget what you need, and then we'll work with you on the back end to adjust things. So no, you don't need site control. You don't need site control. So you can apply without having site control. You can also use this, as you can see here, earnest money on property. Yeah, if you have more questions, you can email. So the email is cwb@cityofchicago.org. Maiwa can throw it into the chat. If we can't answer it via email, we'll be open to having a one-on-one call with you. So can you explain more how organizations with non-capital needs can utilize this grant? I think a good way, I think this is, this question 5.3 is a good template to use, kind of frame some of that. And so I want to note that these are suggested categories, and also there's an other bucket. So if you feel like there's needs that you don't have, you can feel free to use that. But, you know, I think some folks have named needing a project manager, needing to do community outreach and therefore needing a community organizer, wanting to do community outreach, but but wanting to have capital to fund community members, to offer stipends, or to fund the actual programming materials, et cetera, to actually host those engagement sessions, who might need to purchase equipment, et cetera, as you're applying for various licenses, and there's various fees. So I think there's a lot of non-capital related needs that folks have. And feel free to use these suggestions or create your own categories. Yeah, letters of support can be from anyone. So they don't have to be unique. If you've applied for something from the city before, you can reuse a letter of support if it's for the same project. It can be from one of our community web grantees. You know, it's pretty broad. So it can be from a neighborhood resident, it can be from an alderman, it can be from a coalition of community organizers, faith leaders. You know, it's not really many restrictions on who the letter of support can come from, but use it as an opportunity to show the range and of support that you're getting, or the support that you're getting from various TA providers or what have you. So pretty open-ended. Yes, to member stipends, that's one of the eligibility